Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War News Update, first part though of the 16th of June 2025. Sorry I'm a little bit late, but let's get to it. So the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them in the description to the video, linked below there. Now, some interesting numbers here because there are some dips in a number of places, but 1,200 is a fairly decent personnel number for the Ukrainians. The Russians losing considerable numbers still, even though it appears that things are quietening down on the front line. And indeed, we're hearing there are some comments that things are quietening down in Sumy as well, although I have heard other reports that Sumy's pretty well. I've got a thread that I'm going to share with you in a frontline update to suggest that it is looking slightly better for the Ukrainians in Sumy, and they are pushing the Russians back, as Zelensky has claimed, but it is still difficult there. Here we have a claim from the State Border Service spokesman Demchenko saying, on the border of Sumy region, the continuous destruction of enemy infantry has its results. The intensity of the assaults has decreased. These are dozens killed, dozens wounded. When the enemy began to use the tactic of small assault groups, we saw that they practically do not care about their losses. Okay, so that is something that we've seen fairly regularly from the Russians. They certainly don't seem to care about their losses, but interesting that the intensity has decreased, and you can probably gather that from some of these statistics. 2 tanks lost, 7 troop-carrying AFVs, 18 artillery systems. That is below the daily average, and that's the first time for a long time we've seen that in that category. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, that's all right. A single piece of special equipment, and 79 vehicles and fuel tanks. That's quite a bit below the day, well, below 100, which, in fact, let's have a look at the stats for vehicles and fuel tanks, because I think that's it. To me, of all the categories, that's probably the one that gives us the greatest indication of what's going on the front lines, because these days the Russians, I think, are running out of tanks. They're using them as glorified APCs by doing them up like Mad Max vehicles, and troop-carrying FVs are being lost at way below the daily average because I don't think they have too many of them anymore. And they're using instead vehicles and fuel tanks, things like motorcycles and quads and SUVs. But if that category is low, then I think that's one that gives you an indication that there is much less going on along the front line. Right, so let's go to Dell's stats and look at vehicles and fuel tanks. See if my head is in the way. It is a little bit. It is completely. So let's get rid of me. There we go. So you can see that the trend line is definitely tailing off. It's the shallower this. So actually, I really should explain these graphs, because someone asked me the other day, you show this to us as if we know what all of these aspects of the graph, as if we know what they mean. Well, I don't. Okay, so these orange bars on the histogram, effectively, these orange bars are the losses on each individual day for whatever the category is. And this is since the beginning of the war. Be careful at the beginning of the war, because actually they didn't really have strict criteria in place and evidence for losses. So when we go to cruise missiles, for example, at the beginning of the war, there were huge cruise missile barrages, on the opening days of the war, but actually nothing's really showing here, for months until you get to this period of the war. But actually, I would have thought that this level of aerial barrages were being sent into Ukraine right over this period too. So, I would forget this area probably for most classes of equipment, and really we're kind of looking at certainly last 2 years, really. Okay, so then let's go back to vehicles and fuel tanks. That's what we're looking at for this segment. So the orange bars tell you the daily losses. Those add up over time. So the daily losses in total is what is shown by the blue, and the blue line there. So the blue line refers to the total number here. So in terms of vehicles and fuel tanks, 52,096 is essentially where that is out. So you can see 50,000 on the right there on the y-axis. This is for the total, obviously, for the daily losses, it's the y-axis on the left-hand side that you want to be looking at. So, for example, the highest number of vehicles and fuel tanks lost in a single day was 312 here. That's your record, and that's well up here. But the steeper the blue line is, the greater the losses are over that kind of time period. So the gradient represents heavy losses, steeper the heavier losses. So if you see the much smaller losses down here, the gradient is quite shallow. And then once you start getting to this period, we started seeing way more SUVs being used, for example, things like bukankers as well. So the Scooby-Doo vans, we started seeing those get used and therefore destroyed. And then kind of over here, we started seeing motorcycles and quads and golf buggies, the Desert Cross golf buggies being used and therefore lost as well. And once you started seeing all of those extra vehicles thrown into the loss list, you started getting a steeper total line as they were losing more on a daily basis. Then this purple dotted line is your trend line, and that is starting to get considerably shallower at the moment, might even start dipping down, because as you can see recently, and I'll try and make that a little bit bigger. There you go. Okay, so as you can see, that purple dotted line, trend line there, a lot shallower, as more recently we have seen lower numbers of losses on the list there. In fact, that kind of equates to, well, there's your 100 line, and I'm just going to go back across there. So 100 line is there, and we are seeing, so today we're well below 100, which is quite rare. It's not often that you're getting below 100 these days. So if we go back to the data part of this spreadsheet, this workbook, if you like, you've got the vehicles and fuel tanks down here. Vehicles and fuel tanks, we have the daily average. So the highest is 312. The daily average is now 43, and that seems very low considering we're getting consistently above 100. So if we look at the 7-day rolling average, that is 106. So if we average what has been lost over the last total, what's been lost over the last 7 days, and divided by 7, each day you're on average losing 106 vehicles, and a 30-day rolling average is 109 vehicles each and every day. The average takes into account the fact that at the beginning of the war, vehicles and fuel tanks wise, there were very few that were lost. So you've got all of this time period, you've got like a year, so we're going up to, where would it be, 2 years of hardly ever getting over 100. Sorry, never getting over 100, hardly ever getting over 50. So you've got 2 years of sub 50. So then when you started getting up to 100 regularly of vehicles and fuel tanks being lost was in this time period of May 2024. And then it was considerably after that you were getting just massively over 100. To the point that indeed you even got 312, but that didn't come till much later in the war. So that's why the mean average over the whole course of the war is 43, because it's taking into account all of that time period there. And now, if it was to get as low as 43, we'd be thinking that was an incredibly low day, a really quiet day for the Ukrainians. We really don't get that low at all. You know, if it's sub 100, you're thinking, well, that's a very quiet day. So then when we go back to the losses here, you can see that a day of 79 is quite unusual at the moment. Anyway, I just thought I'd explain that because I do take it for granted that you all know what the graph means. Okay, so in terms of sort of personnel, the domain of personnel, another 1,245 bodies of the dead have been returned to the Ukrainians, and I presume the same has gone the other way, but I'm not actually 100% sure about that. The repatriation is part of the Istanbul agreements that has been completed now. That aspect of the Istanbul agreement, with Ukraine receiving 6,057 bodies in total. Again, you know, what the Russians received, I don't know. Now, I just wanted to remind us of the personal dimension to this war, And we'll do that a little bit at the end of the video as well. So Ukrainian actor turned drone operator Yuri Filipenko was killed in combat at the age of 32. Yuri appeared in numerous Ukrainian TV series and performed at Kiev's Academic Drama Theatre. He voluntarily joined the 429th Achilles Unmanned Systems Regiment in 2024. And I'm not showing the pictures of him because he was an actor or anything. He could be a plumber. That's not really the point. It's just that here is a human being whose life has been cut horribly short by an invasion that was not the choice of these people. It was a choice of a murderous dictator. And there is a human cost, of course there is, to this war, both for the Ukrainians and for the Russians. But for the Ukrainians, it's even more painful because they didn't ask for this. They are the victims here. On June the 15th, his wife pronounced his death on social media, stating that her husband had been her world, soul, and light. But she didn't specify how he died. So sad news there, but just wanted to put a face to the loss of the Ukrainians here. Talking about putting a face to it. Hello. So UK intelligence today announced that North Korea has lost half of its troops fighting for Putin. London calculates 6,000 casualties killed and injured of the 11,000 originally ordered to Russia, along with subsequent limited numbers of additional soldiers sent. So let's read through the intelligence update from the UK here. Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK forces, have highly likely sustained more than 6,000 casualties. Remember, intelligence modal vocabulary is quite explicit, so that highly likely is likely, I think it's 55 to 75 in the UK, might be 80. There's a difference between UK and American in that cutoff between likely and highly likely. But anyway, I think that's above 75%, could even be above 85%, but 80%. But it's certainly that area of probability. So in other words, highly likely means that the British are pretty damned sure that the Russians have sustained, or the North Koreans have sustained 6,000 casualties in offensive operations against Ukrainian forces in the Russian Oblast of Kursk. The total casualties amount to more than half of the approximately 11,000 troops initially deployed to the Kursk region from North Korea. Open source reports suggest North Korea subsequently deployed limited numbers of additional troops to Kursk. There have been claims of sort of 13,000 in total, 14,000 in total. I don't know what limited numbers would mean here. Significant DPRK casualty rates have almost certainly been sustained primarily through large, highly attritional dismounted assaults. That was certainly the case initially. They lost huge numbers of troops in these charges across fields that were very attritional for the North Koreans. However, they did adapt, and I think they ended up learning and fighting somewhat more competently. On 4th of June 2025, Russian Security Council Secretary and ex-Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu reportedly visited North Korea for a meeting with the leader Kim Jong-un, his second in less than 3 months. Shoigu has highly likely been a key interlocutor with North Korea regarding their support to Russia for Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. North Korean operations have thus far been confirmed to the Kursk region. Any decision to deploy them into internationally recognized sovereign Ukrainian territory in support of Russian forces would almost certainly require sign-off from both Russia's President Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. That's going to be the key. I think there's been limited response to what North Korea have done, and I've said this many times to you, precisely because they have been operating within Russia, and there was this NATO Article 5 style military bilateral agreement signed between North Korea and Russia that stated that if one country was invaded, the other country would come to their help. That's kind of NATO Article 5 style. And since the Ukrainians attacked into Russia in that attempt to pull, get a token for exchange in terms of Russian territory and pull Russians away from Pokrovsk and other areas, which I think they succeeded in doing, but then it all went a bit wrong much later on. But initially, the North Koreans were brought to plug the gap there because the Russians didn't want to take troops from elsewhere along the front line. Now, the international response was kind of angry and largely rhetorical. The Americans did allow ATACMS to be fired into Russia broadly on account of this. So there was a somewhat significant shift. The problem is most of the missiles have been used by then, by that time, and it was less useful than it might have been. But essentially, the response to North Korean troops being used in Kursk was pretty limited, because I think it was in Russia. If those troops then get sent into, sovereign territory, geographically European territory, if you have North Korean troops fighting explicitly in Ukraine, I think you would get a very you would like to think there'd be a very different response from allies. But of course, we know that responses are often somewhat toothless, very rhetorical, but is there a backing up of the rhetoric with material assistance, support, material change? I don't know. I would hope that the limited response to the North Koreans has been because they've been in Kursk and not in Ukraine, and that would change if they were present in Ukraine. Now, a sign of the Russian evaluation of human life here, and we've seen this before. We saw people at the beginning of the war, Russian wives and mothers get given meat, literally meat, for the death of their sons or husbands, loved ones. In certain areas of Russia, there was meat, there was refrigerators that were given, different things as compensation or gratitude for the sacrifice of their family members, and you're left thinking, oh, that's really poor. Here, that's still going on. So thank you for your son. Here's a microwave for you, says Anton Gerashenko. In Russian-occupied Skadovsk, Kherson region, Alexander Dudka, the head of the occupation administration, presented a microwave oven to the father of a killed special military operation hero in honor of Russia Day. Thanks for your loss. Here's a microwave. Right, Ukrainian soldiers here are seen shooting down an enemy, a Russian fiber optic FPV drone, at the last moment as it was flying directly towards their pickup truck. Now, I'm trying to work out whether they actually shoot it so it goes down, or whether a tree takes it out. But, I mean, I'm going to turn the sound down because YouTube won't like it. This is incredibly scary. He'll be thanking his lucky stars when he gets back to his destination, because this drone is incredibly close to blowing up on him. So this is a Russian fiber optic drone, and you can tell it's got that big old cylinder at the bottom there, following this truck with a Ukrainian soldier on the back firing at it with his gun. So if you look in a second, he's going to turn to the left. He's already firing at something. You can see actually fiber optic trails on the side of the road as well. I presume that is, or it could be wire from the telegraph. But he's firing it. He knew it's coming across the field, and then here it is chasing him down. He's firing at it. It looks like there's two of them in the back. They are firing, and then I don't know whether their firing at it caused it to go into the tree, but it went into the tree. It doesn't explode, interestingly. And then that's the end of that drone. So here they are shooting at it. It's chasing them. It must be so scary, because you're thinking, that hits, I'm dead. Like this, I am this close to death. I'm this close to death. And it goes and hits that tree. I don't know. Maybe they did shoot it, and that's what sent it sideways. That seems, I guess, fairly likely. Another bit of drone footage here. This is of an Orlan drone. So these are the cheap and... Of course, that's going to happen. These are the cheap and cheerful reconnaissance drones that the Russians have used since the beginning of the war. This is one getting taken out by an interceptor drone, and then you can see it's also being looked at by another drone. So interesting that one presumes there are two drones there, because although I can't actually see the drone that approaches this. Oh yeah, I can. Yeah, it's that black. It's that thing underneath. So there's your drone. So the start of the video, the drone is pretty much already on the Orlan, and then bang, and it blows that wing off. I always find it quite impressive that these drones have some kind of mechanism where as soon as they go kind of sideways, it then kicks into action a parachute. But of course, the parachute here is going to be more useful for the Ukrainians, because that's no doubt over Ukrainian, not necessarily actually, because there are theories that these drones are being hit before they even get to the contact line in many cases at the moment. But let's assume that's over Ukrainian territory, then that Orlan is going to be picked up by the Ukrainians, and they'll be thankful it's only softly brought to the ground by the parachute. So anyway, there is that. Right, then we have another video here. This is two surface-to-air missile systems getting taken out by the 150th Reconnaissance Strike Battalion. This is an OSA SAM, so it's short, medium range air defense. Strela is fairly short range air defense system there, but we have seen consistently the Ukrainians taking out the air defense systems of the Russians, and I think on the back of that getting an air advantage in a number of places along the front line, or at least if not an air advantage, they're able air parity, or they're able to push their aviation, the Ukrainians, further forward, and they are definitely operating. And that could also be because they have those two AWACS planes from the Swedes that give them that extra level of radar capability that will keep the Russians at bay. And in fact, the Russians lost recently a Su-35, I think it was, up in Kursk, as a result of the Ukrainians having a greater radar detection than the Russians, as a result of the Link 16 connected Swedish AWACS there. So there's going to be that, together with the destruction and suppression of enemy air defense systems, such as you see here. Now, I'm going to just talk very briefly about Iran, but not for the first time in this video. And the objective for when you are starting a war with someone would primarily be to take out air defenses so you can get air superiority and hopefully air supremacy. And in fact, that seems to be what has happened in Iran. Intel Schizo says this is complete air dominance. Pavel Wojcik says this point has just been bombed by Israel. Today, air control seems to have expanded significantly. Spectacular powerlessness by Iran on all fronts here. So Iran has been hit by the Israelis. Bear in mind, Israel's all the way over here. Iran has been hit on the other side of the country. In other words, that would indicate that there is very little air defense left in Iran where they need it. And that is a scenario that will only be exacerbated. The Israelis, I think, are going to be just continually hammering away at surface-to-air missile systems and gaining the ability to fly in even more places in Iran with impunity, it seems. Absolutely extraordinary in such a short amount of time. And indeed, fighter bomber, the often reliable source from the Russians, and a pilot himself, I believe, Jane Kiev says, one of the biggest Russian military bloggers laments that Israel completely destroyed the air defenses of one of Russia's most important allies in 48 hours. So fighter bomber here says, it's not a lie, then the war, if this is not a lie, then the war can be considered over, with Israel winning on points, even without a ground operation. That is, Israel controls the capital from the air and can destroy any target in the city. The word fighters here should not be misleading. Considering the distance to Tehran from the nearest Israeli airfield, this is space level. This means that somewhere over Iraq there are refueling aircraft, and Israeli attack aircraft are hanging in the sky for 5 to 6 hours in a row, replacing each other. And yes, this means that Iran's air defense is destroyed, if not completely, then by 90%. That's what both sides would be wanting in the war in Ukraine, but neither side has remotely achieved. This is extraordinary that the Israelis have been able to achieve that within 2 days. Might also say something about Russian air defense systems as well. Many have been actually commenting that this is not a good advert for Russian air defense systems, as they've been knocked out with consummate ease by the Israelis. Okay, now we're going to go to a thread here by Maxim Tucker, writing for The Times, and doing actually creating a video that you can watch, like a short documentary video from which these are excerpted, on female fighters in Ukraine. So over 3 days, I embedded for the Times with a Ukrainian female fighting force shooting Russian drones down over Kyiv and training to meet Putin's summer offensive head on. We saw how Russia's war has turned suburban mums into warriors. These women have so much to lose, so I wanted to understand what motivates them to risk their lives. At a time when the US is pulling women back from combat, Ukraine wants more ready to join units on the front lines. So what really drives these women soldiers and what makes them ready to kill and be killed? These female volunteers are training for a renewed assault on Kyiv. They formed the Witches of Bucha, a territorial defense unit comprised mostly of the female survivors of Russia's occupation in March 2022. Russia massacred hundreds of civilians here in Bucha. I've been to Bucha, and it is obviously a site of significant importance in terms of representing what Russia is and has done during the course of this war. Perhaps better than anyone, the women of Bucha understand that this war is not just about protecting the land. It's about saving millions of people just like them and just like us from the horrors of Russian occupation. There are some 70,000 women in Ukraine's armed forces today. Watch our short documentary about them in full at the Times YouTube channel. So that will be linked that is linked in the thread, and you can find obviously all of these thread links in the description below. And I'm going to return to Iran just very briefly, but just make a larger point about fact-checking and I guess epistemology, truth and whatnot. Here was a claim that the Iranians have shot down an Israeli F-35, but whoever did the photoshopping for this is just absolutely ridiculous. And you must assume that actually this isn't a parody in original form, that they have actually just cocked this up. Like the people here, as someone says, breaking news, an F-35 crashes in Lilliput. So, this country of very small people, these tiny specks are surrounding this huge F-35. It's a massive plane. In fact, this has now spawned a whole bunch of memes to do with like aircraft carriers here and Star Destroyers from Star Wars and whatnot. But we must be careful. I showed you two things in my Iran-Israel video the other day of one, an F-35. I did say this might not be true, so pinch of salt. That shot down F-35 image was one that had been taken from sometime previously and had been altered to make it not look identical to the previous usage of that image. So that was not true. And then the ballistic missiles being shot from supposedly an Iranian submarine was actually a Russian submarine shooting ballistic missiles earlier in the Ukraine-Russia war. So it's very difficult to fact check everything because I just never have time to produce a video, and I trust my sources, but sometimes we get duped. And here's a cautionary tale. Not this one. My other ones are cautionary tales. This is somewhat more ridiculous. But when you get these ridiculous examples and you so obviously know that it's fake, it does make you think, well, what about all those times when they aren't so fake, or when it's real footage but it's just been reused or taken from a different angle and then it's claiming to be something else that other than what it really is, or whatever. It must always be careful. Okay, moving on to distant strikes. So last night, 138 Russian drones were sent into Ukraine, 125 of them taken down. That's pretty good, only 13 getting through. 84 were shot down, 41 suppressed by electronic warfare. Not bad interception rates, better than it certainly has been. That's sort of, what is it? So 13 out of, I forgot where I'm looking now, 138 is just under 10%. So that's pretty good. Right, Zelensky has warned that Russia is planning further attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which may draw less global attention due to the focus on the Middle East. Intelligence on threats to nuclear facilities have been shared with the IAEA and US counterparts. So it looks like energy infrastructure is back on the agenda. Anton Gerashenko, as many have been referring back to this CNN article, which has just been written. It is broadly something that we've talked about a number of times here, and there have been other articles written on this topic about how, and you've heard me mention it time and time again, how the Russians have changed their tactics and technology with regard to Shahed drone attacks. But let's go through what the CNN article says. It won't be anything new. So Russia shifts tactics again, assaulting Ukrainian cities with swarms of killer drones, according to CNN. In recent weeks, Russia has intensified its aerial assaults on Ukraine, launching up to 479 drones and missiles in a single night. These attacks have become not only more frequent and large scale, but also increasingly concentrated. Drones are now flying in swarms, operating non-stop for 3 to 4 hours at a time. Moscow is reportedly capable of producing around 2,700 Shahed drones per month, along with approximately 2,500 decoy drones. Those numbers keep changing. Over the past 4 weeks, at least 154 Ukrainians, including children, have been killed in Russian drone and missile strikes. Another 900 civilians have been injured, and these days Russian drones are flying 2 to 5 kilometers, 1 to 3 miles above the ground. It has become impossible to shoot them down with machine guns. So the Brownings on the back of SUVs that were previously pretty useful low-tech solutions to shooting down Shahed drones are now far less able to do so, as they are flying. They're not always flying up high, sometimes they're very low, and they try and mix it up. But if they are flying high, then those machine guns are going to be unable to shoot them down. Currently, Ukrainian air defenses are intercepting about 80% of incoming drones, down from 95% just a few months ago. And that's exactly the point I keep making every single day. Right, I did report on this yesterday very briefly, but I just want to expand on this. So, and I did this actually in the geopolitical video, so I haven't done it in Hits and Losses video. Christopher Miller from the Financial Times reports that a building used by Boeing, an American aviation company, of course, in Kiev was badly damaged in a recent large-scale Russian air attack in what appeared to be a deliberate strike on US aerospace company, on the US aerospace company, according to 6 people familiar with the matter and photographs seen by the Financial Times. Quote, Russian strikes on American companies in Ukraine are yet another example of Putin's disregard for US peace efforts, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha told the Financial Times. Why this is really, really freaking significant, like this is super important, is because the minerals deal was touted by the Americans as being a form of deterrence. They didn't need to provide soldiers for peacekeeping forces. They don't really need to provide weaponry, because do you know what? If we do a minerals deal where we can extort loads of rare earth metals and oil and gas out of your land, then the Russians wouldn't dare attack us because we're Americans and our American employees would be working there, and they act as a deterrent to the Russians. Meanwhile, the Russians are like blowing up Boeing, American corporation's offices in Kiev. Like, not even out on a mine out in the middle of nowhere. They're just deliberately sending drones in to blow up American infrastructure in Kiev. So the Russians don't give one damn about the American deterrence that the minerals deal supposedly will supply. And this then completely counters the American argument for not providing boots on the ground and for just relying on the minerals deal. Tim White says, coincidence or not, Russia hitting Boeing's Kiev offices in this week's attacks. Did I recently hear Trump pledge to protect all Americans and US businesses, or does it only count when Iran is firing missiles and not Russia? So then there's this added dynamic of making really big claims about protecting American interests and businesses in Israel and so on and so forth, but Ukraine just seems to be a completely different moral evaluation for him. Sad to say, Putin continually laughing at US impotence, says Tim White there. The headline for the Financial Times article is Russia air attack damaged Boeing offices in Ukraine. Aerial strike hits US aerospace giants premises in Kiev, raising questions about Moscow's intent. And the idea is that it was on purpose. So then Kiev Insider reports that the US has remained silent after Russia bombs the offices of the US defense giant Boeing in Kiev. So aviation or defense, actually. So Boeing obviously do both. But interesting if that's a new setup of Boeing inside Ukraine, because they're working in collaboration with the Ukrainians in defense manufacturing, and the Boeing offices might have been hit, and that's why it's been kept quiet, and that's why there aren't really any photos about where it is particularly. I don't know if that's an accurate photo or if it's kind of a generic photo or what, but it could have been kept quiet for almost a week because of the sensitivity of Boeing working in Ukraine. So the US has just kept stum about that, and that could well be a bit of an issue. Tatarigami said, "We were told the mineral deal would deter Russia from targeting US businesses, something supposedly beneficial for both the US and Ukraine. So what happened to that assumption? It seems Russia doesn't care. No one takes tough talk seriously when it's never backed by action." And that's a pretty solid point there from Tatarigami. Ukraine's foreign ministers have some movings onto a slightly different subject, but not entirely. I mean, we are talking about the US presence at these energy sites of energy. So the mineral deal, would include oil and gas extraction. Here, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha has made an appeal to the leaders gathering in Canada, so the G7 meeting is just taking place from today, to be strong with Russia, with Andrei Sybiha saying that that they will advance and not impede the peace process, the Ukrainians. It follows a missile attack on Ukraine's oil refinery in Kremenchuk. So 2 nights ago, Kremenchuk was absolutely battered, and that was a very overt attack on the Ukrainian energy industry. So Sybiha himself says yesterday's barbaric attack on Kremenchuk's energy infrastructure is part of Russia's campaign to bomb Ukrainian civilian energy infrastructure. So that might have an impact on the US getting involved with Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Moscow intends to attack Ukraine's energy grid while the world's attention is on the Middle East. This is especially cynical given Putin's ongoing attempts to imitate constructiveness towards US peace efforts. In reality, it shows complete disregard for them by ramping up terror against Ukraine. Instead of Russian strikes on Ukrainian energy, our partner's strategy should be to hit Russian energy hard with devastating sanctions. Oil price cap of $30, new restrictions on the Shadow Fleet and its captains, and other energy sanctions hit Putin where it hurts. This will advance and not impede the peace process. So that's what he's talking about in not impeding the peace process. Heavy sanctions will bring Russia to the table more quickly. Now, in terms of what Ukraine were doing last night, there's very little detail out there other than that Orel as an oblast or maybe city was hit last night. Locals report series of explosions heard in different parts of the city of Orel, and there are several videos of the sound of munitions flying overhead. That looked fairly quick there. Was that a missile? That looks, interesting. Okay. Okay. Sounded like an engine, though, more of a drone engine, but that's moving pretty quickly. Right, other than that, I don't really know of any battle damage assessment what happened last night. What I am going to talk about is Yelabuga. So 2 nights ago, Yelabuga was targeted. That is, remember, where the Russians are manufacturing Shahed drones. It's a really important target, and I think it should have been taken out 10 times over already. It is being targeted, but often, because it's quite far away, often with not so many drones. Despite videos appearing to show an explosion only at a car park in Yelabuga, Ukraine's general staff claims they did hit the drone plant in the city. It seems the explosion in Yelabuga was caused not by a drone being shot down, but by an aerial bomb released by the drone. This animation shows a flight of the Ukrainian drone and the bomb dropped, which just missed any of the plant's buildings. So here we have it's a pretty simple kind of graphic there, but you can see the car park and the bomb supposedly, unfortunately, hitting the car park. So unknown how much damage was done. A Ukrainian A-22 Flying Fox drone with FAB bombs struck the Alabuga zone in Tatarstan, where Russia develops and builds Shahed 136 drones. One factory worker was killed, 13 were injured. The site plays a key role in supplying attack drones for Russia's war against Ukraine. And here we have an explosion going off over in the distance over there. It's quite a significant explosion, but it doesn't look like there are any buildings there particularly. So that could well have been on the car park there. And that's the image just below that video with the dark black smoke there that I showed yesterday. Something on fire in Yelabuga, but it might not have been, unfortunately, something that caused too much damage to the actual manufacturing facilities, which is more of a shame. So it's a huge shame. A pair of light engine aircraft, A-22s, and a glider arrived at the Alabuga plant, according to this photograph. So actually, you know, we've got a claim that, and that could be the bomb underneath. You've got the plane-style drone dropping a bomb, but there also appears to be a glider in tow too. Towing a glider by an aircraft is a typical scheme for bringing them to the echelon, where after undocking they make an independent flight due to air currents. So here we have a claim that a glider was then released and then could go and do, you know, it's equipped with its own explosives. The glider does not have a power system, so after undocking it immediately heads for it. A glider without a pilot can carry a combat load of up to 100 kilograms. In this way, it is possible to hit two objects at once at a great distance from the front line with large equivalents of explosives. So that is, so either a bomb, well, it might be not either or, but and. So yeah, it could have been a bomb underneath a Foxbat and a glider behind. However, there doesn't seem to be too much evidence that any great damage was done to Alabuga or Yelabuga. Right, I'm just going to show you this. This is, again, going back to Iran. Sorry to show things from different conflicts here, but I think they can give us an indication or better understanding or better visualization of what's going on. This footage is taken from a flight in the Middle East, somewhat near to Iran, and you can see these ballistic missiles going up into Earth's atmosphere, and it gives you an understanding of that parabolic trajectory of these missiles and quite how far they go up. So cruise missiles will be flying, you know, just above head height, really, not to, you know, just above the trees. Your cruise missiles are going to be flying fairly slowly, and their course can be changed throughout their route to the target, whereas these ballistic missiles are fired up into almost into space, and then they come down, and the steepness at which they come down from outside the Earth's atmosphere, or from the very high areas of the Earth's atmosphere, the steepness with which they come down gives them this incredible pace, and it makes them very difficult to shoot down. And here you can see quite incredible footage of these ballistic missiles from a civilian aircraft flying into the atmosphere before then returning to their targets, in this case in Israel. Now, I've also shown you videos of these getting shot down in the upper atmosphere by things like the THAAD, THAAD system that shoots ballistic missiles down much higher in the Earth's atmosphere rather than much closer to the target, which then means that they could, you know, drop debris or explosives all over the target still. But yes, so quite incredible footage there. Right, let's move on to other bits and pieces. So here's a video of cracks in the road forming on the approach to Kerch Bridge, which is a jewel of Russian engineering and pride of Putin. I wonder if there are structural issues, with the bridge that are represented by this, by these cracks. But yeah, cracks developing in the bridge, probably not a good sign. I've already talked to you about the Sumy region having decreased activity there. The Russians have been poisoning Ukrainian military personnel with chemical weapons in the Seversk direction. So this is Serebyansky Forest. Then you have Bilahorivka coming down. You've got Seversk there. Verkhnokamianska, and then down to Toretsk. Down to the top of the Bakhmut area. Sorry, over here. This is Bakhmut, and that's Solidar there. And yeah, you've got the claim here that the Russians have been poisoning Ukrainian military personnel with chemical weapons there for 3 weeks in a row. That's according to the press service of the Rubizh district of the National Guards unit. So that, yeah, pretty typical. Now, Kyiv Independent reports that Russia is to demand Ukraine destroy Western weapons to end the war. According to a senior Kremlin official, the remarks reflect Moscow's growing list of maximalist demands presented in its so-called peace memorandum. And of course, this is ridiculous. They just have this whole list of red lines that Ukraine's never going to cross, but they're hoping that if Ukraine become intransigent and refuse to compromise on any of these insane demands from Russia, then Russia will no doubt claim that, look, it's Ukraine that aren't interested in peace. Because, of course, America's pushing for peace at any cost. The Ukrainians don't want peace at any cost. They want a just peace, and they don't want to have to cross all these insane red lines in order to fulfill exactly what Russia are demanding. But I don't think the US care too much about the outcome. They just want peace, peace, peace. And so Russia could manipulate the US into being angry with Ukraine for not agreeing to do peace and say it's Ukraine's fault that there's no peace no peace deal getting done. Now, Daily Telegraph has an article by Owen Matthews. Owen Matthews wrote a book on the war called Overreach, which is very good. I advise you read it. It's an excellent book. Ukraine here... his article here says, fighting Russia is now Europe's problem. America is about to leave the stage. So he's now sort of reading the tea leaves and saying that America's, they've left. See ya. They're not really too bothered anymore with the war in Ukraine. Moving on to other things. This is fairly typical, by the way, of Trump's foreign diplomacy. He kind of did this with Afghanistan, quickly do a deal, go over the head of the Afghani government, go straight to the Taliban, do a deal with the Taliban, and then do a quick one, and then off ski, see you later. And then Joe Biden comes along, has to pick up the pieces, do a deal, the Doha agreement that was incredibly poor as an agreement. And actually, it does appear that Trump does get kind of bored of different things and moves on to other things. And that would be perfect for Russia. That's exactly what they want. And here, Matthews is saying, America's about to leave the stage, kind of got bored or whatever. You can't do a deal. Well, we're going to just leave. And of course, that punishes Ukraine more than it punishes Russia. It doesn't punish Russia at all. In fact, it's completely beneficial for Russia. But the US picking up the football and saying, right, I'm going home now, is a punishment of the victim here. That leaves Ukraine with three options, says Owen Matthews. The first is to rely on Europe stepping in to supply the weapons and equipment it needs. The second is proposed earlier this month by Zelensky, is to buy US-made weapons from Washington with European money. And the third is to make the weapons it needs in Ukrainian factories funded by money from European allies. Have to wait. It's probably going to be a mixture of all of those options. Russian TASS state media has just published the following on its Telegram channel. Quote, the Parliament of Iran has approved a strategic partnership agreement with Russia. This was reported by the Embassy of the Islamic Republic in Russia, which is very curious timing, says Anton Gerashenko. We don't quite know what that's all about, but the Russians and the Iranians might well have signed yet another kind of agreement, I presume, concerning what Israel is doing with Iran. Then we hear that Russia may be sending, or may want to send, or intending to send up to 10,000 soldiers to Transnistria. This is coming from the Moldovan President Maya Sandu, who's saying that Russia may use civilian flights and diplomatic passports for this purpose. I've been wondering about this and how they would get certainly personnel. It's more difficult to get equipment. They've got quite a lot of equipment there. There are 1,500 soldiers there already, but quite a bounty of ammunition and equipment. And the Ukrainians have apparently considered doing an assault into Transnistria, but decided against it. They would certainly want to get their hands on some of the kit that's there. The Russians can't really access this, but the idea is that they could surreptitiously, in a kind of clandestine manner, send 10,000 troops in by pretending they're civilians, whacking them on planes and getting them to Transnistria and bolstering their forces, and then possibly using that as an offensive force going into Ukraine towards the east, or to threaten Moldova as part of a Moldovan strategy. Interesting. Now, G7 is starting today, and apparently Trump is going to have bilateral meetings with Zelensky. So Zelensky's going to be there, but also Scheinbaum from Mexico and Mark Carney from Canada. That's what's on the calendar for Donald Trump. Big political event this week is a meeting of the G7 in Canada, says Tim White. How much can Trump get away with blocking this time? Wording on the statement about Ukraine, sanctions, weapons, existence. Think that's the orange shopping list for the week in Kananaskis near Banff in the Rockies. Okay, here's Senator Blumenthal and Senator Lindsey Graham talking about widening their sanction intentions. They've been talking about sanctioning the crap out of Russia in their bill that has 84 co-sponsors now in the Senate, which is very, very healthy. It would pass with consummate ease, certainly in the Senate, and I assume in the House of Representatives as well. Now they're thinking about applying this to Iran.
One more point about Iran.
Yeah.
Because we're going to talk about Russian sanctions.
Yes.
I think we ought to strengthen sanctions against Iran, which is a non-kinetic, a peaceful means of exerting pressure. I'm hoping that perhaps Senator
I will
Graham
be
and
your wingman. We'll write the bill right here on television. China, if you're listening, stop buying Russian oil and stop helping the Iranians. You'd make the world a safer place if you would stop.
They buy it because it's cheap, though.
Yeah,
But right
then
now,
they should pay a price for propping up Putin's war machine. We should crush their economy.
Okay.
Lindsey Graham talking strong there. We should crush their economy and punish them for buying Putin's hydrocarbons. So, that same theory applies to Iran as well. These two are saying. Now, Russia is illegally transporting oil near Greece and evading sanctions, according to Ukrainian intelligence. Since July 2024, this activity has been carried out by an Aframax tanker with the IMO number blah, 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 which does not have Western insurance. So one of these kind of ghost ships, this dark fleet that the Russians are utilizing, one of these ships is operating very near Greece consistently, and it's used for transshipment purposes. So it takes oil from one ship, and then I presume then takes it on itself and then loads it onto another, and whatever it does. Also published was data on 159 oil tankers, most of which are part of the so-called shadow fleet of Russia. The information about 55 captains of this fleet. In addition to circumventing sanctions, the shadow fleet is also involved in reconnaissance and sabotage operations. So these shadow fleet vessels also help the Russians out by gathering intel too. Now, I will on to a few sort of personal things at the end here with regard to the war. I showed you this picture the other day of a Ukrainian POW that had been returned that had horrific wounds from torture on him, but also had glory to Russia in scarified flesh on his stomach, where they had a Russian surgeon carved "Glory to Russia" as an inscription on the body of this Ukrainian prisoner of war. And now Ukrainian doctors are working to remove it. So here you can see they are acting on it. And you can see actually that it is disappearing somewhat on the right there. I presume that's where they've already been working on it. The serviceman was captured over 15 months ago after being wounded in combat, and when he woke up from surgery in Russian custody, he discovered the propaganda inscription left by the operating surgeon. After he returned from captivity, the doctors began treatment with polynucleotide injections to stimulate tissue regeneration as a first step in the removal process. They're preparing for more aggressive intervention and expect only a light trace will remain after several months of treatment. That's pretty impressive. Good news for that chap. Now, talking about POWs, here's a before and after shot. Instead of a million words here, an Avastar defender is shown with his partner or wife before and after Russian captivity. That's what he looked like before. That's what he looks like now. Just absolutely incredible image there. A really significant before and after change there. And I think it's important to remind ourselves, like I said earlier, about the human impact of this war. And then finally, another one here. The 4-year-old Mark, who was saved by his mother Anna at the cost of her own life, is recovering. On the night of May the 18th, Anna Yefimenko, 27, was killed by a Russian drone attack. A direct hit on a residential building destroyed the family's home. And this is a 4-year-old kid who was saved by his mother, who protected him. So during the attack, Anna covered Mark with her body to protect him. She was killed. Her son suffered numerous injuries and lost his left eye. Mark's dad, Serhiy, says that Mark misses his mum very much and that the treatment will be long. The eye prosthesis is ahead. So he's going to get a fake eye, obviously, there. And sadly, mum died in that, protecting her loved one. So I just wanted to remind the viewers of the human cost to this war in Ukraine and the devastating implications it has for the Ukrainian society. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate your support. Remember, you can help support Ukraine by going to Car for Ukraine. I haven't reminded people about this at all, so please do so. Go to Car for Ukraine, go to the campaigns. This is linked below, atpgeo.com/donate. Go to the Summer Sunshine Trucks. I will be very far down the list because I haven't talked about this at all yet. Oh, look, in 5th place there with 1,767 euros of support. If you can help out there, that would be absolutely fabulous. We're trying to raise enough money for one truck, which is about 10,000 euros. That would be fabulous if you can support and help us reach our goal. This is a bit of a stopgap campaign before we do another one that we're just kind of working out with Jigaspor. And I am going to be speaking with Dimko from Jigaspor.
One more point about Iran?
Yeah.
Because we're going to talk about Russian sanctions.
Yes.
Thank you, Richard Blumenthal. I'm going to be talking to Dimko from Jigaspor tonight, hopefully, in a live stream. So come and check that out. He works for the Unmanned Systems Forces, so it should be a really interesting conversation. Okay, in the meantime, take care of yourselves. I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.